What's up, everybody? This is A7X Ben, and welcome back to the collection review series. This is episode number 24, and we'll be going over equipment. So, equipment is not super frequently used. A lot of times there's better crew options, and a lot of the effects are just sometimes they're kind of minimal, and they're often overlooked. I think it's partly because they were only in one set, Fire and Steel, the second to last set. So, sometimes I kind of have to force myself to put them into fleets, but a lot of them can be pretty useful. And I'd say overall, as a game piece element, they're probably kind of underrated. And I'd like to use them a bit more going forward. So, start with the first one, which is Fire Shot. So, it's similar to Fire Pot Specialists, but it's not limited to S range. So, if it hits, you replace the mast with a Fire Mast, but the drawback is huge, and that's why it's only 1 point. So if it's a 1, eliminate it from the game and replace one of this ship's masts with a fire mast. So a devastating negative. I've definitely been on the receiving end of this backfiring, especially in Vassal Campaign Game 1. I'm sure Xerix will remember when the Spanish attacked a certain faction, and a lot of my gunships had fire shot, and it was backfiring left and right. It was a mess. So it's pretty horrible if you miss with a 1. But for 1 point, it does add decent offensive capability to one of your ships. One of my favorite things about equipment in general is, unlike the specialist counterparts like Firepot Specialists, it's not limited to S range. So not only can you take advantage of L range cannons on a gunship or any kind of ship, you can double the range with like copying extended range or using the sniping ability where you have to roll a 6 to hit. So it's really cool using it with stuff like that, like range extenders and whatnot. And then the Fire Mast rules, you're probably familiar with. They changed these in some of the later sets. So the fire spreads on a 5 or 6, or on a 1 to 2, sorry. And then it gets removed on a 5 or 6 on a good roll. So it used to be worse than that. It was like 1 to 3 to spread, and then I think 6 to eliminate. And then 3 or 4 still, so that does nothing. So overall, Fire Shot is probably the riskiest equipment, but can be a big payoff. So if you usually roll good with cannons, I'd recommend it. But somebody that rolls a lot of 1s and shoot actions, it's kind of not worth the risk a lot of times. Sometimes I'll go with a Firepot Specialist, especially if I've got a 2S cannon on that ship, especially at the bow, because that's usually the first cannon that'll be in range or shoot an enemy. So Exploding Shot. This one is actually 3 points. So this is a universal misprint, and the Pirate Code corrected it. So this one is a 3-point equipment, and a lot of them work similar, where you have to declare which cannon is shooting it and where you're shooting at, of course. And then if it hits, that's where things get interesting in terms of the differences, of course. So here, this one, if it hits, you replace an enemy mast with a fire mast and eliminate a crew. But if it's a 1, eliminate it from the game and eliminate a mast from the ship. So higher cost, higher payoff, and a less bad drawback. I think the biggest con here is the cost becomes a little bit prohibitive. So for 3 points, that's the cost of a captain, which is an essential gunship ability. And it's also only 1 point away from World Hater, which is often 4 points. So a lot of times, Exploding Shot, it doesn't give you the best bang for your buck. It's still a solid offensive weapon, but usually you're going to see this more in like big gunship builds, or a lot of times like big fleets. It's easier to shoehorn this into like a 200-point fleet than use it in any kind of remotely competitive game like under 60 points. So not often used, I would say, but can be a pretty good weapon. So, and if you hit with it, it's pretty satisfying because it's very damaging. So, and we've got Grape Shot. So this one is 1 point. I think the rest of them shouldn't have typos for the most part. So this one basically eliminates crew. So eliminate a crew instead of a mast. So it's pretty specialized. A lot of times you'd prefer to maybe pay 2 points for crew elimination, like you see on Duque Alfonso de Castilla from Frozen North. He's got captain and crew elimination for 5 points. So this one is a crew instead of a mast rather than in addition to. So that's important to keep in mind. So this is a pretty specialized use case. Sometimes there's like crew, like attacking type ships that you might add this something that eliminates cargo, and then you could try to take out like a ton of stuff with only like minimal hits, start taking out a ton of crew. And this one, now we're going to get into some of the ones that don't have bad drawbacks. So if it's a 1, remove it from the game. So not as bad. You don't lose a mast. You don't set yourself aflame. So not too bad of a drawback. And that's a good thing because, I mean, if it was a worse drawback, it wouldn't even have to be like half a point or something. So overall, pretty specialized one. I haven't used it a ton, but if you know you're going to need to eliminate crew from a gunship, it's still a solid option. So Stinkpot Shot is one of my favorites. So if this one's 1 point, if this one hits, do not eliminate mast. Instead, the target's crew can't use their abilities on her next turn. Notice it says their abilities, plural. So this doesn't just shut down one crew like a canceller, it shuts down all of them. So you don't get to choose, like with a canceller, you don't get to choose whether or not you cancel a ship ability or a crew ability, but it can shut down more than one ability and more than one crew at a time, which is powerful. So this one I've used pretty successfully in some games a while back. I want to get back into using it a bit. And if you roll a 1, remove it from the game. So again, not a terrible drawback here. Don't have to lose a mast or anything. So overall, this one's pretty good. I would say, I think in the past I've called this one the most underrated. And I think it almost needs more like playtesting in a way from like the community. I think we could maybe see some of the benefits of it more the more it gets used. So having it instead of eliminating a mast can still be tough though, because a lot of times you'll need to eliminate as many masts from an enemy ship as possible in order to like properly stop them. But this can be really good against 10 masters, because a lot of times you won't be able to dismast them in one turn or one shoot action in the first place, and they're often loaded with tons of really good crew. So if you're facing like big monster enemy gunship setups, this can be a pretty devastating weapon. So overall, that one gets a pretty high praise from me. But that being said, I still want to use it and kind of test it more to kind of confirm that for good. So this one, I guess there is another typo. So this one's 3 points, and there's another errata. So 3 points, just like the Smoke Pot Specialist. And that kind of makes sense because it's almost the exact same, just the equipment form. So this one won't do any damage. You do not need to target a ship. Simply place the center of a fog bank within S of the ship. Can't touch any island or ship, and remove it at the beginning of your next turn. So almost identical to the Smoke Pot Specialist, which is 3 points as well. And I haven't used these a ton. I feel like they're a little overpriced. I think 2 would be a good cost. Even in fog hopping fleets, they can be of limited use because the fog bank disappears. So, which is probably good because you can't litter the entire board with endless fog banks for no, you don't even have to roll well to place them. So, kind of a niche case. It's not going to show up too often. I wouldn't expect to see this often. And overall, you could use it maybe with some reverse captain stuff, some shenanigan combos with crew, or in a fog hopping fleet. But other than those use cases, I wouldn't expect to see this too often. And it's not really one of the better equipment. It's okay, but it's kind of just a unique one. It doesn't do any damage. So chain shot. Now we're getting into a couple, like I think 3 that I haven't used too much, to be honest. So chain shot, this one hits, basically stop the opponent. So do not eliminate a mast. Instead, the target can't move on her next turn. If it's a 1, remove it from the game. So similar to chain shot specialist, obviously, just with the drawback that brings the cost down, but you can use it with L-range cannons. So just have to decide which one will be better, this or the chain shot specialist. So pretty simple, similar to the specialist crew that you might be familiar with. And grapple shot, this one allows you to board. So if this one hits, do not eliminate a mast. Instead, the ship can initiate a boarding party against the target. The cannon roll is 1, remove grapple shot from the game. This one I kind of like because it essentially allows you, if you hit, you can basically board from L or beyond. So usually you got a ram to board. S boarding gets around that, where you can board from within S with that ability, but that usually costs about 5 points or 4, sometimes on the captain combo crew. So this one, for just 1 point, you have to hit. So you have to use a cannon, and it won't take out a mast, and you have to hit. So there's all those criteria. But if you have L-range cannons for just 1 point, you can board from L away. Or, like I said earlier, maybe more if you got a range extender of some kind. So pretty neat overall. I kind of like this one for that in that regard. I would try to combine this with I guess, kind of obvious, but I'd try to combine this with a boarding ability like Captain Nemo or Bonnie Peel, or maybe the Massacre ability that eliminates all enemy crew if you win a boarding party. So overall, fun one to play around with. Definitely kind of a niche use case, but would be pretty fun on some of the boarding monsters that also have L-range cannons. I think it could be pretty good in the right situation. So double shot, probably my least favorite equipment. And so this one, declare which before shooting the D6. If it hits, the cannon can shoot again. If either cannon roll is a 1, remove double shot from the game and eliminate a mass from this ship. So that's why I don't like it. I definitely roll my fair share of 1s on cannon rolls. And so even if you hit with the first one and you can use this, if you roll a 1 on the second roll, it misses, you remove it, so you can't use it again, and eliminate a mast. And then, of course, if you roll a 1 on the first one, you don't get the double shot, and then it's gone, and you eliminate a mast. And then you have to you probably want to eliminate the mast that you were shooting with, because if you don't, you might be eliminating a cannon that hasn't shot that turn, possibly. There's different ways to do it. There's a tiny bit of like double shot, like I guess you could call it like stats theory or whatever. You could like figure out the optimal way to shoot double shot based on like your cannon ranges and ranks and whatnot. But overall, I'm not a big fan of this one, probably because I don't often roll well on cannons. But even if I do, it just doesn't seem like, kind of like fire shot. It's kind of doesn't feel like it's worth the risk. So not highly recommended. But if you're crazy lucky with cannons, I mean, it could be decent. So I'd much rather have a cannoneer, or just forego the 1 point, add an oarsman elsewhere in the fleet, things like that. So now we're going to get into the letters of marque, which are very different than all the various shot equipment. So these ones are, I think, very underrated and almost never used. I don't know. I think at least one has been played against me at least once, but almost never. So the ship can use parley against English ships. If the ship shoots at an English ship, remove English letter of marque from the game. So, which kind of makes sense thematically. So it's like the jig is up or whatever, the gig is up. So this one, there's basically, we can kind of go over these all at once. I guess you can include soul marque too. So there's one for each of like the big 4, like nationality navy type, like country fleets. So there's English, French, Spanish, American, and then there's soul marque, which is a super rare actually from Fire and Steel. Can use parley against cursed ships. So if you're facing any of these factions, for just 1 point, you can add like a parley defense. So that's pretty interesting. And I think these are kind of maybe underutilized because they can easily be added to your fleet via the +5 crew. Like Bradley, let's say you're using an English fleet, you're facing the French, you got Bradley for your +5. You place crew after you see the enemy ships, and the +5 crew, or the +5 points, will be at the end of they'll be the last 5 that you have in your fleet, obviously. So you can easily see if your opponent is all French, you could be like, maybe I'm going to put in French letter of marque on my gunship face down, and maybe they can think what it might be, but a lot of times I don't think people would be expecting to see this. So then you could flip it. They might think it's like fire shot or who knows what on a gunship, and then you flip this as a defensive measure to use parley, which is a pretty interesting keyword overall, and kind of like a tiny obsession of mine. I think parley is a pretty interesting ability. But anyway, so I think these can be kind of a fun niche use case, and I'd definitely like to use these more. And I think there could be maybe even a tiny bit of like competitive play use. Probably not, but either way, pretty interesting equipment. Highly recommend checking that out, kind of considering your options, especially if you've got an opponent that always plays American or whatever. You could kind of maybe get them to think about using another faction or using a mixed fleet. Flip over American letter of marque, have like 1 on each ship or something. And then parley's a risky ability, of course, but anyway, just stuff to consider. I think it's pretty neat that you can add them via the +5 after seeing what kind of factions your opponent's using. So we'll wrap this up with the Fire and Steel LE equipment that I have. I don't have all of them, but it's really quick to go over. The big key here is that these are removed from the game, I think that's the case with all of them, even the ones I don't have. But notice they say, after using, remove this from the game. So I don't know why they made the limited edition equipment like that, but they're basically just worse versions of the regular ones. So there's not a great reason to use these, unless maybe I don't know, if you like assume that your opponent will capture the ship that's using it, and then you can prevent it from being used against you, but that's just kind of a bizarre assumption to go into game with. So I don't really see much point of these, and they're also way harder to get than the regular versions, most of which are just uncommons from a relatively common set, Fire and Steel. So they're not really, I guess, yeah, there's just not a lot of reason to use them. So it's kind of interesting. But anyway, so mine are still unpunched. I don't really know that I'll bother punching them. So anyway, that pretty much wraps it up. So hope you enjoyed this episode on equipment. Feel free to check out the affiliate links in the description. They're going to help out the channel, my site, Pirates with Ben. And feel free to leave a comment. I suppose question of the day should be, what's your favorite equipment and why? So I would probably go with Stinkpot Shot, but stuff like Exploding Shot and the Letters of Marque are pretty interesting to use and think about using as well. So anyway, hopefully you enjoyed this episode. Collection Review Series, CRS number 24. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in more videos.